on YouTube. And we want to give a big shout out and thanks to the ISU Cultural Events Committee for sponsoring this week's events, especially the Student Awareness Campaign, which is also going on right now. So why are we doing Open Education Week? Well, the library became aware of some really compelling research around open education, and we formed our Open and Affordable Educational Research Committee, Resources Committee, in order to put together this event, because we learned that 42% of Florida's college students said that they actually took fewer courses because they could not afford their textbooks. And then at around the same time, research came out showing that courses that adopted OER were seeing decreases in their withdrawal rates, a 29% decrease average in withdrawal rates. And those two numbers together, I think, really paint a compelling picture about the financial situation of students in the US and how OER can play a part in student retention and success. And also, before we get going, I have 3 really quick announcements, an infomercial for the library, if you will, and our OER efforts. You may not know this, but ISU is now a publisher. We can publish ebooks. And so if you intend to write a free ebook, whether it's OER or whether it's all rights reserved copyright, please contact someone in the library. They'll refer you to me, Kristen Whitman, and I'll help you get started with that. Our collaborator, Daphne Sang in the ITRC, has done an amazing job making an OER Moodle course that you can self-enroll in Moodle as a faculty member to get updates about OER from all over campus. And then next week, if you're interested in learning more about OER, there's a statewide event. The Idaho Open Education Week is going on from March 1st through 5th. And you can either Google Idaho Open Education Week. I didn't put the link on the slide because, of course, you wouldn't be able to click on it. So I'll also post that link in the chat for everybody. But without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker, Mark McBeth. He's a Fall 2020 Textbook Hero honoree. He's doing amazing work with OER in political science, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to share with us. So, Mark, take it away, and I will stop sharing.
Thanks, everyone. So that photo of me is from 1995. I was 31 years old. I like that photo because I had hair. My students always give me a bad time about that photo. So thank you both to Daphne and Kristen for all your help, for not only for this lecture, but just on OER and supporting OER. It's been really helpful to me. So I have a little PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you an assignment. I'll show you my Moodle course and how I used OER. So before I get into the slides, when I first was interested in OER and I received notification that Academic Affairs was advertising a grant opportunity, I actually thought that this is a good opportunity to save students money. But now that I have been involved in OER for the past 2 years, I think there's broader goals to OER. I think that it has really helped my pedagogy by embracing OER not only in the introductory courses, but also in upper division courses. And in turn, that has helped student learning. I also believe that not only does it save students money, but it helps retain students and will help students graduate. And so some of the data I think that Kristen showed leads to some of those conclusions. So what piqued my interest in OER? Well, one of my pedagogical principles is that I like to have a strong voice in the classroom. And I also like my students to develop their own voice. I believe that students take courses from faculty, not books. I was an ISU student myself, and I know the great faculty at ISU, they use good readings, but it was really the faculty member that made those courses. So I believe that students take courses from faculty, not books, even though readings are important, very important in helping the student learn. I had become increasingly frustrated with what I call coffee table books. So coffee table books at the introductory level are big books that cost lots of money that our students might have to pay. If they're new, $150 or $200. For a used book, they might have to pay $100, $125, $80. And sometimes faculty will require students to use multiple coffee table books in their courses. And I had become frustrated with those books for a variety of reasons. one of which is the cost to students. And I'll discuss my other frustrations in coming slides. Of course, I wanted to save my students money and give them a better educational experience. I also believe my interest was piqued because I believe that general education and first contact courses at ISU are crucial. They are crucial in student retention. A committee that I am on is actually doing some research on first contact courses. And those first contact courses are essential in getting students on the right path to successfully graduating from ISU. And so OER, I believe, helps play into the importance of improving general education and first contact courses. And part of the way that you do that, of course, is through using readings that are OER. So I started my OER experience with Introduction to American Government. I have then expanded this idea to my Political Science 2202 course, which is also a general education course as well as a required political science major course. And I've also used OER now in various 4,000, 5,000 public administration courses. So it's been really influential to me over the last 2 years. So how did I learn about the grant? Well, I believe that there was an email from the College of Arts and Letters and Academic Affairs had announced this grant. So the chair of my department, who at the time was Dr. Donna Liebrechter, asked me if I'd be interested in participating because her and I had talked about some of the problems with readings, particularly in the general education courses and the expensive nature of those readings. So that is how I learned about the grant, was through my college academic affairs and my chair. So some of the instructional challenges that I was hoping to solve, right? I think, again, initially it was kind of, well, a way to save my students money. But as I thought about OER and I learned more about OER, I figured that there are instructional challenges that I could solve. So number one, as a professor, my number one goal is always to interest my students in political science. Political science at the general education level might not be a class where students think they're going to be interested. And so I always want to get my students interested in my courses and interested in why political science is important. And I do that whether I'm teaching at the 1,000 level or the 6,000 level. I always try to interest my students. I want my students to develop their own intellectual voice. One of the things I don't like about what I call coffee table books is that they tend to be cookie cutter. They tend to all be the same. They tend to have the same assignments. And I want my students to develop their own intellectual voice. And part of the way I do that is by developing assignments and readings that are unique to the course. I want my reading material to be up to date. It has to be accurate. It has to be accessible to students. And it has to allow me flexibility in how I approach the course. And then I have pedagogical assumptions that you'll see shortly. So part of what I like about OER is that I'm not locked into a 20 chapter textbook that I think I have to cover all the material. I have more flexibility. That flexibility allows me to pursue my own voice as a teacher. And then in turn, that allows me to help my students develop their own intellectual voice. So some of these pedagogical assumptions that I use that I think play into how I incorporated OER into my courses. My first assumption is students learn by reading, hearing, applying the same concepts in different ways and connecting concepts to other concepts. So there's some literature there, and I do have references at the end of the slide. Leemanson talks about how the brain tries to make sense of the world through neural connections, and how as professors we have to create pathways through repetition, and that is reinforced in two other pedagogical books that I use in my doctoral pedagogy seminar in political science, Lang and Ambrose. Okay, coffee table books don't necessarily do this. The standard textbook in political science covers a chapter, covers concepts, but then never returns to those concepts. So I like to teach with concepts, introduce concepts in the early part of the class, and then connect those concepts throughout the class. So you might learn a concept like power, which is the central concept in political science. And that concept will come up every week in my class. And OER helps me do that. And I'll explain why that is the case later. Whereas I think the coffee table books don't achieve my pedagogical assumption. My second assumption is that students learn by critiquing evidence, by using evidence, and by writing, right? And that the discussion, assignments, and exams must be unique to the course and the professor. So that's my idea of voice. I'm developing the student's voice, but I also have my own voice, that when you take a class from me, you're taking a class in my voice. So the coffee table books, right, and the materials that are prepared by book publishers, in many ways fail to connect to the professor's unique voice, and they fail to develop meaningful assignments. I think the assignments tend to be cookie cutter assignments that everyone in the United States who is using this book is using. And they're not books that are unique to the class or unique to Idaho or unique to ISU or unique to me as a professor. So I like the idea of getting students to write, develop their own voice, but I have to have the right readings to do that. And OER has helped me greatly in that regard. Number 3, critical thinking is crucial. And for critical thinking to occur, students need information and must comprehend that information before they move on to higher cognitive tasks of application. So here I use Bloom's taxonomy, right? And this is basically the notion that before students can engage in critical thinking, they have to have a base of information. And so that is the importance of reading, and that is the importance of OER, because it allows me to build on Bloom's taxonomy and Lane's interpretation of Bloom's taxonomy and how I design my course, right? So my course is very conceptual. So with OER, I'm allowed to look for readings that supplement my main OER reading that deals with major political science concepts, things like power, politics, political efficacy, tolerance, political consent, political ideology, all conceptual information that you probably wouldn't get necessarily in a coffee table textbook. Or if you did get the conceptual information, again, it would not be repeated throughout the course. It would only be used in a chapter by chapter approach. Okay, my last assumption is sociality, right? So this comes from Joshua Eiler, his book, How Humans Learn, The Science and Stories of Effective Colleague Teaching. So sociality is basically that we learn by talking to each other, that we learn by building social bonds. And I think sometimes the coffee table book, because it is so big, right, in a general education course, it has so many chapters, and you feel like you made the student buy this $150 book. So you feel like you have to cover the entire book. You end up just lecturing all the time. And I believe that students learn by building these social bonds with each other, right? That they have to have a sense of belonging, there has to be community building, and that the professor has to engage effective intellectual engagement. And so all of those assumptions, which I've had for years, really played into OER. And I found that once I transitioned to more an OER format, I was able to explore my assumptions and not be tied to the traditional textbook. So OER, again, greatly played into my assumptions of teaching. Okay, so how did I choose or locate the appropriate OER for my course or courses? So as part of my preparation for the grant, I did an extensive search to see what OER books are out there, right? The ISU library helped me by finding some of those depositories where OER books are found. I eventually, for the 101 class, I found 5 books from an online search. And I critically evaluated each book, and that took quite a bit of time. And I actually, for another paper that I wrote for the grant, I actually provide a critical evaluation of each of those books. I eventually chose a book by Crutch and Wasicki, American Government, second edition, which is available at OpenStax. Okay, and so there's the cover of the second edition of the book. Okay, so what I found from the Crutch book that I didn't find at the other books that I analyzed was that even though the book has 10 different authors, it has 17 chapters, but has 10 different authors, the book had a nice consistency to it. And the book was fairly conceptual. It used concepts like I did. Um, it had 17 chapters and it has 17 chapters and 1,781 pages, or 781 pages. That's a lot of pages, right? So if I was using this book and I required my students to pay $150 for it, I would feel obligated that I had to use every chapter and every page in the chapter. And if you're going to lecture and discuss 17 chapters and 1,781 pages, you're not going to have very much time for discussion. You're going to be lecturing. You're not going to have time to build the sociality, to have the discussions. You're not going to have the time to make repetition and make connection between concepts, right? So what I liked about this book was it provided me a nice base of information. Remember, my view of critical thinking is students have to start with a base of information. You can't learn critical thinking until you know some basic concepts and some basic information. This book does this, and the book was flexible enough that I could assign chapter 3 maybe on federalism, and I could just assign a part of that chapter, and then I could assign additional OER readings from that chapter. And I didn't feel bad because I was only covering part of the chapter or part of the book, because the students received this book for free, right? They could download the book from the OpenStax website and as a PDF. I also put it on the Moodle page. They could also purchase this for their Kindle on Amazon for free. Okay, so in addition, I wanted to include other OER resources because I wanted this course to be unique to my voice, to my background in political science. Because again, I think great courses come from great professors, not from great books. Books help, readings help, but they're not the course. So these are some samples of some OER resources that I found as part of my grant. Putnam's Bowling Alone, which is a classic article in political science. I found the first chapter of Russell Dalton's A Good Citizen. I found a variety of essays, philosophical essays. I found a variety of things from around the world, the Freedom House reports. I had all kinds of things with court cases. I had things from John Locke talking about social contract theory from Stanford, you name it. I tried to use, where possible, edu sources or org sources, so .org or .edu sources rather than .com, because I did evaluate the sources for quality and for consistency. That was part of my how I spent my grant time, was evaluating these sources, and that did take quite a bit of time because I wanted to make sure I was giving the students good, accurate sources that were not only accessible and free, but were also accurate. Okay, so there's more samples, right? And the great thing of OER was my students, for example, could, as you'll see in a minute, they could explore the US Supreme Court, and they could see court cases that were happening, court cases that are happening in real time. When we talked about the US Senate, they could go to Senator Crapo's website and they could see what kind of committees he was on, what kind of bills his committee was considering, and do all that in real time. Okay, but these, both the Crutch book and these samples, my biggest advice is you have to spend the time to evaluate these readings and make sure they are appropriate for your course. And again, the .org, the .edu, and the .gov sources I thought were all appropriate for my courses. There are some .com sources that I do use, but I limit those to a great extent. And I try to discourage students from using .com sources as well. Okay, and so that my sources go on and on, right? And if you want to, I can go just real quickly here. Oops, hang on. I'm going to go to my Moodle page so you can see, right, there I am. Let's see. But there you can get a sense here. This is how I set up my Moodle page, right? And you can see, so there's the syllabus, there's the open source book, and then there are my readings. right? So the student would have their syllabus and they would say, here, read chapter 1 in Crutch. Notice it already revisits many concepts we've already discussed. Then they'd have an additional reading. In this case, why is government necessary and how does the public interest arise? That is a reading that I'm the author of that reading. It's like a 3-page reading. And I tried to emphasize readings that were short, that were accessible, but that were also accurate, right? And I also do recommend that you do write some of your own readings for the course. I think that is also very helpful. Okay, how much time did I spend on my OER project? Again, this is an estimate. I spent approximately 50 hours, I think, in preparation of the additional course readings and preparing to teach the Crutch book. Most of that was evaluating OER sources, including textbooks, and preparing the Crutch book. And then I spent another additional, probably 20 hours evaluating other resources. So it's probably about 70 hours I spent on the OER project. And I'd also include, I spent time writing a fairly significant, long, probably 30-page evaluation of my OER experiences. And I presented that to at ISU about a year ago, right before the shelter in place, I believe in February of 2020. Okay, so what is an example of how OER changed my pedagogy? So for this, I thought I would talk about writing assignment number 2 and how OER changes my pedagogy in the 101 class. So typically what I do is, for the section on the Supreme Court, I would give the students, when I'm using a traditional textbook without supplemental readings, OER readings, I would give my students a hypothetical Supreme Court case. And I would then have them do some research on Supreme Court case precedents. I would give lectures on those precedents. The textbook would discuss those precedents. And then they would deliberate on this hypothetical court case. But what OER allowed me to do was, the textbook was really good about talking about the Fourth Amendment and the importance of the Fourth Amendment. And it had some really good court cases on the Fourth Amendment. So instead of writing, what I normally would do is I would write a hypothetical case, or I'd use a hypothetical case from the readings. Instead, what I did was I gave the students access to the US Supreme Court website, the .gov website, ussupremecourt.gov, right? And they heard this case, Mitchell versus Wisconsin, and it was being argued right as the case was being introduced in my class. So they could actually use the links on Moodle to read the arguments before the Supreme Court. They could actually read the transcripts of those arguments. And they were given, right? They were given this assignment, which is unique to my course in my voice. They were given the facts of the case, Mitchell versus Wisconsin, which was again being heard. And then they were asked to answer these questions, right? And so we had a great discussion of this case. So the case basically was Gerald Mitchell was accused of DUI, and he fell asleep in his vehicle, and he was taken to the hospital, and he was tested whether or not he was under the influence of alcohol while he was asleep. And the question was whether or not that evidence that he was indeed intoxicated could be used to convict him of driving under the influence. And that led to great discussion from my class. And what was interesting was the decision in Mitchell versus Wisconsin did not come until June of 2019, even though I taught this course in the spring of 2019 and ended in May of 2019. I told my students that when the decision was released by the Supreme Court in June, I would email them the decision of the court. I did. Remember, this is almost 2 months after the class ended in the end of June of 2019. Most of my students got back with me because they were excited about hearing about how the Supreme Court had ruled on the case. Right? And if you're interested, the court did rule that the search was legal in these circumstances, though they remanded the case back to the Wisconsin Supreme Court and gave Mitchell the opportunity to challenge whether or not in these circumstances the search was consistent with the Fourth Amendment. So that's just one way that OER opened up my writing assignments in my 101 class. Okay, so back to my slides. Okay, so how did it change my pedagogy? Again, I'd never liked to be trapped by my readings. As a young professor, I would adopt a book or books. And then somewhere within the third or fourth or fifth week, I would say, oh my goodness, I am trapped by this book and I don't really like this book, but what do? I have to march through this book. So increasingly, as I became a more mature faculty member, I learned to tailor my readings to the course. And I think OER has given me more license to do that. And so I now use an OER approach, not only in my 101 and 202 courses, which are both general education courses, but I use it in my 4454 and 5554 course with a $10 book, right? So I use a book, Getting to Yes, and students can buy this for $10. The rest of my readings in that course, which is a public personnel course, public administration course, are OER readings. They're articles that are at the ISU library, or they're open source links. I use it with a $10 book in 2202. I use it with a $20 book, that's my expensive book, in my organizational theory course, which is the 5551 course. And in my intergovernmental relation course, I don't use any book, I use all open source readings. And the feedback from the students has been great. I can tell you that in my 202 course in December, the last day of class, we talked about some of the problems that college students face today that my generation did not face. And one of those problems that students said was the cost of books. And they were appreciated that in my 202 course, they had to buy a $10 book, but in other general education courses, they were buying $200, $300 books. And so my view again is my students get more learning and less costs. Okay, so in upper division courses, my recommendation in upper division graduate courses, if you're thinking about OER, use refereed articles found in the ISU library, right? We want our students to engage in more difficult readings at the upper division level, and textbooks sometimes does not accomplish that. And so what I do is I use refereed articles found in the ISU library to shape how I develop my readings and how I develop my courses at the upper division level, okay? So my other advice to you is there's going to be a lot of work up front on OER, but there's much improved pedagogy, and so you're much happier as a professor because you're not locked into these readings. There's more student interest and more student learning. So even though there's more costs up front for you as a professor in preparing an OER class, you're going to be a lot happier, and so are your students. Okay, the benefits to my students has been, I think my courses have just been better in the last couple of years. Better courses, better learning, less expensive books, better student retention. We end up with more students graduating. Okay, so my questions, I'm at 30 minutes, and there are my references if you want to see my references. And again, I'd be glad to share these slides if you're interested in some of my references. So with that, I turn it back to Kristen for questions.
Wow, what an impeccably timed presentation. And I do have a number of questions for you, Mark, but I'll just check quickly to see if any of our attendees would like to type questions in the chat or in the Q&A module. Give you some space to do that because I don't want to take up all the airtime. Well, feel free to enter them if you have any. And I just wanted to say, I think what you've done is so extraordinary, and I really appreciated just the chance to get to hear more about it, because I think from a numbers perspective, an administrator's perspective, or a state policymaker, they look at the benefits and they'll just turn to faculty and say, just adopt an open textbook. You know, how hard could it be? Just change your textbook. And what you've shown is the amount of effort and intellectual work invested into this to make it really extraordinary is not just that simple. And so I would like to know from you is How could the administration, or what additional support could you have received from whatever quarters that would have made this easier for you and smoothed your way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you first you mentioned the publishing of ebooks. I'm really interested in that because I do have quite a few things that I've written, and why I put those on Moodle. I think having an ebook would actually be really nice for students. So I didn't necessarily know that. I think maybe you mentioned that to me when we talked in December. But I think the ebooks, the ability to develop ebooks is really helpful. I think some recognition. I think a couple things, and Kristen, you were really helpful when we talked in December about this. I think the administration, instead of just viewing this as a way to save students money, I think it should be tied in to ways to improve student retention, learning, and graduation, and to improve faculty pedagogy. So I think the grant was really helpful because the one-on-one class was a trial run for me. And so when I made this conversion to my other courses, I really had an idea what I was doing and what I needed to look for. So I think some more of those grant opportunities, not for people like me, but for like seed grants to get other faculty interested in this, I think that was really helpful because, to be honest, I might not have fully made this conversion to OER without that initial grant, which just gave me some ideas of how to approach this. I think some rewarding for OER. I think this OER week is really important. Just recognition. The textbook hero. I like being a textbook hero. I like that idea. I just think some recognition of how people use OER in the classroom, how it improves the classroom environment. I think all that's really important.
Two follow-up questions for you. One, was the grant enough money? Did you need more? Did it get you through, but you were really pressed, or you had to work really hard, or?
Yeah, I think it was $2,000. I think that was definitely appropriate. I think 2,000 was really fair, and I thought that was actually fairly generous. And again, I probably spent 70 hours. That's an estimate, and I think it was more than fair. So I think $2,000 was very fair.
I have a question for you. So do you feel that sense of recognition? Does the culture at ISU, did they really support this project as something that was very worthy of your time and perhaps considered in, promotion decisions or support from your department?
So I think it has at the departmental level. I teach our pedagogy seminar, so I have interested several of our graduate students into using OER in their own courses. And then there has been recognition at the college level and at the academic affairs level. So again, about a year ago, right before the shelter in place, I gave a presentation. I know Pi was involved in that. The current interim provost, Karen Appleby, was very involved in this, as well as Joanne Tokel in academic affairs. So I think ISU has been very involved and very supportive. I just hope ISU now is starting to make the connection to how this plays into improvements in quality teaching, as well as saving students money. And again, how it plays into student retention and graduation, because I do think OER is really essential in that regard.
Do you think that faculty would be interested in some kind of formal training course around how to search and evaluate OER?
Yeah, I think so. I think formal training is good. I think giving resources is good. I think hearing the stories of faculty who have had success. So OER week is, I think, really helpful. Just hearing the success stories from people that and then I've had people reach out to me and ask me questions. So I think all that is good. I think all those kind of things, bringing recognition and making it kind of less scary, what is OER? Open, oh my goodness. And I think it gives faculty more influence in how they teach their courses. And I think faculty generally like that because, again, as a young faculty member, I would get locked into these books and I say, oh my goodness, it's February and I've got 8 more weeks with this book and I hate this book. What do I do? OER gets around that because it gives me that flexibility. And I think most faculty are going to like that.
That's fantastic. I've been keeping up my eye on the questions in the chat and no other questions have come in. So I'll just continue to monopolize your time and ask you about your particular book because it was an OpenStax book. Did that book come with any ancillary materials and were they helpful?
It did. And actually, I typically don't like these ancillary materials, and I tend not to use them. So let me give you a little background here as a young faculty member, and then I'll tell you about the OpenStax and what I did like. When I was a young faculty member in 1995, I adopted a book. I look up here, I probably still have it somewhere. And the publisher would send you lecture notes, and they were actually on transparencies in those days. Remember we used to have the old transparency slide, right? And so you had lecture notes, you had test banks. And I was like a young faculty member, I was like, wow, I'm getting paid here. I could just basically read these lecture notes. That doesn't work because those lecture notes weren't in my voice. And so I had to learn to develop my own voice as a professor, as a lecturer. And then the same with the tests. The test banks I would look at the test banks and say, well, that's a confusing question. I don't even know what the answer to that question is. And the assignments just weren't that interesting. And I think and I'm not sure that's why the case. And I became very critical of these ancillary materials. But with the Crutch book, the ancillary materials are written by professors who are adopting the book. And so that you can just go onto their website and here's a assignment I did, Wisconsin versus Mitchell. And I use several of those, at least for discussion questions. And I even use some of the test questions on the test, which normally I never do. And I just think it's partially because it was driven by faculty, and the faculty who use OER tend to be faculty who are really, really into teaching, because it is extra work. And if you're going to start writing your own chapters and those kind of things, and you're going to start writing assignments and posting them on the OER website, you're really into teaching. And so I think there's a nice little OpenStax community there that I learned from. And so I did find the materials helpful in that regard. But that's really a key, is that the traditional textbooks give you lectures to read. But if I don't write that lecture, that's not my voice. That's awful. And so what I like about OpenStax is they don't have that. They allow you as a professor to really drive the book instead of the book driving you.
That's great to hear. That is awesome. And I just have one final question, keeping my eye on everything coming in. My final question, and you kind of addressed this a little bit, but I just think it's a nice note to end on, is there any particular advice that you would give to someone who's on the cusp, who's intrigued, and not sure where to start, whether it's just moral support, like do it, you can do it, or if there's anything concrete you want to add?
Yeah, so don't be intimidated. And I think the advantage of open source OER books is that if you start, let's say you designed a course and you end up in the third week and you realize it's not working that well. And so you could change your readings then, right? You're not locked into this. So that's the beauty of this. It is a little bit like teaching without a net, like walking on a high wire without a net. But embrace that. I think so. Start down the path. Talk to someone like me. I can give you advice. There were times where I said, "Oh my goodness, I have too many OER readings." Well, I have too many OER readings. I just eliminate some of the OER readings because I didn't charge I didn't make my students pay $300 for them. So that was the beauty of that. And my evaluations, OER, we have a question on political science evaluations. Did the professor give interesting readings? And that is something that everyone in political science always complains about, that we do well on other things, but we get lower scores on our readings. My reading scores have gone way up, partially because I am adapting that to the students' needs. So that my advice is, don't be fearful, and realize that if you go down a road with OER, you can change it. That's the beauty of OER. You haven't made the students purchase a $300 book. So don't be afraid,
and let your pedagogy drive your class.
Well, thank you so much again. I really can't thank you enough for your time. No, your time is really valuable, and I feel like I've just learned so much, even after having chatted with you about your project before. So I'm sure you'd be willing to take questions from anyone who is too shy to ask.
Yep.
And any last thoughts, anything else? I did, everybody who's attending, if you wouldn't mind just taking 1 sec to fill out an evaluation form to let us know how we did on planning ISU Open Education Week and what you thought of the session, that would be really appreciated. And other than that, I think we can call it a day.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Daphne. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Laura. Thank you for your comment.
Oh yeah, Laura made a comment. Laura, I really enjoyed your expertise. Laura says, I really enjoyed your expertise, especially about the first contact courses. And
Thank
she
you.
said, at a previous time, she said, love that, driving the book. So I think that was about your book comments there.
Thanks, Laura. All right.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.